Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hello and welcome to episode 132 of the podcast. In this episode, I talk with Christina Teevan and we talk about special needs ministry. Christina started an organization that helps serve special needs families, provides respite care, but also connects those families with churches. That was kind of the idea behind the organization, is that there were so many families, and this is probably true of a lot of our communities, that have special needs or disabilities and for different reasons are not connected to a church. Many of them want to be, have tried that many times, and have not been able to do that successfully because a lot of churches just aren't equipped to serve them well. And so she started an organization that helps churches, do what they need to do to serve special needs families well, but also provide respite care and other things for families with special needs. And so we talk about the organization, what do they do, how did it get started? But then we also talk about how does she help churches? Because if you're like me, you want to know, okay, what are you teaching other churches to help them serve special needs families more? And so we kind of talk about those two things in this interview. As usual, you can get the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 132. Before we jump into that interview, just want to give you a heads up that if you're listening to this as the podcast comes out, we're coming up on Christmas. I hope you have a great Christmas and a Happy New Year. We won't have podcasts released on Christmas Day and on New Year's Day, but it'll be back in the new year. So I'm looking forward to that with some great guests. That's going to be a lot of fun. Also, as soon as we get into the new year, on January 10th, Ministry Boost will be hosting a webinar on volunteer training. And in the course, the volunteer playbook that I created and many people have gone through, one of the things you do is you kind of grade yourself in these different areas of volunteerism in your church. And I don't know if I was surprised, but training was one of the lowest graded things that those who have taken the course have said about, the different areas of their ministry. They thought volunteer training was one of the ones that they don't do as well in. So we're going to do a webinar at the turn of the year, share a bunch of ideas, to get some different voices in there and just hear what they do, what does the plan look like. And then I'm excited too, because we're going to talk about volunteer training online, like using some tools to do that. And we're even going to have a free course to give away about how you can use some online tools to train your volunteers that way. So with all that said, I hope to see you on the webinar, but let's jump into my conversation now with Christina about her organization and how she helps families with special needs and helps churches connect with those families. Well, today I'm joined by Christina Teevan. Welcome to the podcast, Christina.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about you and your family and what you do. We're going to dive into a lot more of what you do, obviously, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name's Christina Teevan, and I live in Ashland, Ohio, which is a small community about an hour north of Columbus and an hour south of Cleveland. And it's kind of a rural community, and my husband is a pastor here at a larger church, and we have two small children. One is 11 and one is 7, and they're girls. And we have a heart as a family for people with special needs. The last 20 years, we have been guardians for a man with Down syndrome who just passed away almost a year ago in January. And he was 69 years old. And through that, we learned just a whole host of things. But what I do here in Ashland is this. I run a ministry called Ashland Special Needs Ministry, which is very near and dear to my heart. It is based around a respite program that meets the needs of people with special needs in our community. And what we do is we give a break to families who have people in their families with special needs so that the parents can actually have a time away. So the child or the adult with special needs can come and their siblings so that the parents actually have a true night out where they can have a break. And through that, we then hope that those families will feel comfortable in a church setting and come to the churches in our community. And so we have an exciting program happening in our Ashland community, and we love on these families. We see a lot of different disabilities, and my volunteers and I are challenged each time we get together to just love them, be the hands and feet of Jesus, and try to really get these families into a church where they feel welcomed and loved and not hear the word no, which they've heard before in church settings.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of what you also do is help churches welcome these families, right? So if a church doesn't feel like it's prepared to serve special needs families, you help them get ready, right?
I sure do. So part of my job is to work with churches in our community, actually sometimes out of our community too. Lots of people contact me and say, hey, we've got this family that's come with a child and we are out of our comfort zone. We don't know what we're supposed to be doing and how we welcome them into either our young children's program, our middle school program, or our high school program. And we're not quite so sure what we should do. Can you help us? Can you come train our staff? Can you walk us through what would be the best fit for them? Or can you come and look at our facilities and say, how can we make this more accessible for this family? We really want to keep this family in our church program, but because we don't want them to go seek out another program and they fit here so well, what can we do to make them comfortable? We don't want them to hear no every Sunday. And that's something that I really work on with churches.
That's great. We're going to talk about that for sure. I imagine many of the leaders listening are thinking, yes, tell me what you do, because we want to do that at my church, or we do special needs ministry, but we're always looking for ways to improve. And we'll get to that for sure. But I want to start just with the organization and like how it got started. You provide respite care, like you mentioned, but the community is kind of involved in all of it. So how did it get started, and what does it look like in terms of what you do for families with special needs?
Sure. About 4.5 years ago, a small group of people got together, and there was a woman who was the driving force behind this. And she really felt a need that in our community there was a real push to help those with special needs, but not when it came to those who are attending church. So we took a survey of our community, and like I mentioned before, it's a smaller community, but when we took that survey, we found that at least 400 families in our community were not being served in a church setting of those with disabilities. So 400 families that were impacted by disabilities were not in church at all because they either weren't welcomed, the facilities weren't available accessible and available for them, or they'd heard the word no, which, daily I run into families and say, oh, I attend this church. Could I help you maybe try to attend? And I've had families burst into tears and say, oh, we tried that years ago and it didn't go so well. And that's my own church, which breaks my heart. So that reminds me every Sunday of how we need to help these families hear a yes, not a no. So we got together and actually they said to me, can you come up with a plan of what you would like to see this look like? And so we sat down, and my plan was, how do you make families feel welcome in a church when they've not felt welcome before? Well, you invite them in a different way. So we thought, let's do a respite program. Let's have them come on a Saturday night when all they have to do is come and drop their kids off and they feel loved and welcome. And it's a free program where they can just feel safe and connected and get to meet lots of volunteers and lots of people who love Jesus, and their kids are going to hear about Jesus, and it's just going to be a way to love on them where all they have, there's no commitment. They just get to be loved on. And so that was our premise. And then from that premise, we said, let's then move into, our goal is to get those families then to go to a church from that. So we wanted to start some special needs programs in churches from that. And that was our next goal. So we worked on that, and we actually accomplished that. And then from there, we also do some fun things during the summer where we send them to a camp by Johnny and Friends, Johnny Erickson Tata, and we do that in the summer and build into them a little bit more. And so what we've seen is just a huge impact as this program has grown, just watching these families feel loved and integrated into church and just integrated into our program. They know that they can call at any time if they need help, and they know they can call at any time if they just need a listening ear. So that's what our program is built on. That's how we started it. We base it on the simple premise that every child is a gift from God and made in His image. And so they know that when they walk in the door that this program is, yes, it's a community-based program. It's a non-for-profit, but they're going to hear the gospel every time they walk in the door, and they're going to find out that when we smile at these children, it's because we know that they're God's gift, every single one of them.
That's great. And how did you get the community behind it? I mean, obviously there was some force within the community. That's kind of how it started. But how did you get the community behind it? Like, who volunteers with it?
Sure. So getting the community behind it has been a really fun and exciting kind of hard effort. I have gone absolutely everywhere and spoken about it, and I had t-shirts made, and I had lots of different things to try to get everybody to hear about this. I tried to get into the schools, and unfortunately, the schools kind of took the stance that if they supported it, they would be responsible for what we were doing. So that didn't work, but I contacted some friends, and I actually started working at our local university here so I could get into the special ed program there, so I could talk to teachers who are or kids who are becoming special ed teachers. And now they're all volunteering. And I have National Honor Society students from our local high school who are volunteering. I have a community of high schools that are around us, and I talk to all of them. So we've got a good group of kids doing that. I have young kids from all walks of life around our community who want to come and volunteer. Once they hear what we're doing and their parents find out what we're doing, they are so excited to come and be a part, and they become buddies to these kids. And then what's great is these kids see them in town, and they'll yell their names, in Walmart or wherever, and they're just so excited to see them. We also have a huge list of adult volunteers who either have been touched by special needs somehow in their lives or just have a real heart for it. And oftentimes it's funny because they argue over who they get to volunteer with because they love so much each of our attendees that they just can't. We call them friends. They'll come to me and say, "Who do you have me with tonight?" And they're just so excited to find out who it is. So we just have a great way of getting the community involved. Now, it's funny because people will come to me. Even a mom came to me just a couple weeks ago and said, "How have I not heard about you?" Her son has Down syndrome and he's 52. And she said, "How have I not heard of your program? This is just ridiculous." And I said, "Well, it wouldn't be because I haven't tried." And she just lives kind of far out of town a little bit and goes to a smaller church, and we hadn't quite maybe gotten to that church yet and spread the word, but her son has been coming and loves every minute of it. And I gave him a t-shirt, and now he's wearing it everywhere. And she said, "Well, you need to know, we're going to tell everybody we know now." And I said, "Well, good. Spread the word."
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's an example too. She goes to a small church that is a little farther away and doesn't know about it, but how has it impacted the local churches around there? Both you're helping them, but some of those people are probably volunteering as part of the program too. How has that worked?
Yeah, it's impacted quite a bit. In fact, there's a church that just south of here in our Ashland County, there's a church that was doing an after school program that had a lot of kids with special needs that were coming to it because a lot of the parents were using it as a childcare opportunity after school. But it was a Christian-based program, and they called and they said, "Listen, we've got these kids who are really struggling that are having behavior problems. They've got some special needs. They've got this. Can you just come down and do some training for us?" Well, we did some training, and then from that, some of those families had started coming to respite. And then some of those people from that program started to volunteer for us. And you just can't imagine how much it just impacted everybody that became a part of it. And then those volunteers that come and are a part of it also, they're wearing their t-shirts everywhere, and people start asking about that. And they get to share, this is what we do. And we tell them about Jesus. And we do lots of different things. And people start asking questions. And my high schoolers come back and say to me, "You know what? This week in my high school class, I had a whole bunch of people ask me about my t-shirt, and I started telling them, and they want to volunteer, and they can't believe you're doing this. And they know some friends with special needs. Can they bring them?" And I have a middle school young lady who, she goes to her church, and she wants to start her own special needs program, and she's 12. And I have other people who come to me all the time, and they'll say, "You know what, we're going to do this on Sunday morning. Can you give us some ideas of how to change the curriculum? Because we have a little girl in a wheelchair and we want to make sure she can do this." So it's just impacting. It's like a ripple effect. Everybody comes and they have a different idea of what we can do, to make this work. And the local churches are getting behind it. And I was sharing with Nick before we got on here that before we actually started all of this, I met with a huge group of pastors at a restaurant to just give them an idea of this is how we're going to start this program. This is where we're going. And we want your churches to be ready, because once we say Ashland churches are welcoming those with special needs, you need to be ready, because we want them to know that, we're not trying to be churches where the friends have to lower the man through the roof, like it was in the Bible. Mm-hmm. We want to be churches where people with disabilities can walk in the front door or be rolled in the front door, and there's a place for them ready, that we're we're accessible, we're ready, we're welcoming them with open arms, and there's not a no. And a couple of those pastors, when I started talking about this and saying, this is what we're going to do, we're so excited. God is going to work through this, and you're going to see families coming to know Jesus, and high schoolers bringing their friends and being impacted by this, and middle schoolers and, elementary kids. And a couple of the pastors were like, yeah, we're on board. This is amazing. Let us know what we can do and we'll be ready. And then a couple of pastors looked at me and said, no, take me off the list. This is not my no. What if they all come? And well, what if they do all come? Praise Jesus. You know what? If you look through the Bible, a lot of Jesus's ministry was to those who were suffering, those who were disabled, those who needed him, those who had leprosy, those who couldn't reach him, those who were just trying to reach the bottom, the bottom of his garment to get his healing. And so we need to be reaching these people and making sure that those with disabilities get into our churches. And that was a long way to get to that. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's great. I mean, and so there was pushback, but that's okay. You found the people that were going to be a part of it, and you've done it with them. And I want to kind of shift gears and talk about that, because I know people who are listening are going to be interested in this as well. How do you help churches, and specifically, like, what do you help them with? Like, what are the things you do to help them either start a special needs ministry or just do a better job with what they're already doing? And I know you did this at your church too. So you kind of get to do it at your church, plus you get to help other churches. So walk us through some of like what you do there to help, and what has to be put in place, and what might be missing, so that those of us who are in churches that want to do this better too can take some of those ideas.
Sure. So let me start real quick let me just reiterate one more time that when I go into other churches, I'm not there to say what could be wrong. I'm just there to help them find ways to improve on what they have. So let's look at your existing curriculum. Let's look at your existing facilities, and let's try to make simple changes that can make it accessible. Or let's look at your volunteers and whoever is willing to have some training or to just take a step out in faith to help these kids, because some of these kids can be pretty taxing. The other night at Respite, I invited a new family, and I was the one working with this little guy because I knew he could do a couple of things, and I got head-butted right in the nose, and then he grabbed my hair and was pulling my hair. And that some of our volunteers might say, ooh, I'm going to tap out on that one. That may not be for them. And your volunteers need to say what their strengths and weaknesses are. So I can come in, and I often train volunteers, and I talk to them about that. And it's really good to let your volunteers say, this is what I'm okay with, and this is what I'm not okay with special needs. And sometimes you'll have medical issues that need to be addressed, and you might have to have some nurses come on board. So when I go into churches, I do a lot of training with that and talking about, okay, let's talk through all the what ifs of what could happen with if it's a specific child, if it's a specific special need, or if it's let's say a church is really having an influx with autism, then I will do a whole training on autism, and we will go through and make sure that we can cover what they need. Or I will come back multiple times, or I will be that hands-on person who comes on that Sunday morning for 5 or 6 weeks and works with you and shows you how to help this child specifically, so that the family can feel like they can go into the church service and know that their child is covered, so they can have that time. Because I've said this many times, oftentimes these families have come to church and heard, no, I'm so sorry, we can't take your child this morning because we're not quite sure how to best handle him or her. Well, that's not what we really want to say to our families, because they've heard that oftentimes since the diagnosis has been given. So we want to try the best that we can with the gifts that we've been given by God to help these families. So that's my job when I go into churches, to train, to find accessibility the best that I can. It could be as simple for accessibility as somebody in your church who is skilled with woodwork to build a ramp, and that may be all you need. It could be some other things like installing handlebars in your bathroom to help somebody, using the restroom more accessibly. It could be as simple as my friend who also speaks at Orange at different times will talk about how she has brought a massage table that raises and lowers, and put it in their bathroom to change adults who may still wear diapers, things like that. There's just some things we can do to make your your church more accessible. So I do a lot of training and a lot of things like that. Now, when I talk about my church, sometimes I can get a little bit emotional because we have a young woman at our church who's 40, and she went to our children's program up until a point where she couldn't go anymore because there really wasn't anything for her to do. And then maybe about 15 years ago, some people decided they would try to start a special needs ministry. And when they went and asked for a room in our church, this is quite embarrassing. They were given kind of a supply closet in the basement. And that's what they were given for a couple of kids. And that's really embarrassing. Mm-hmm. And so, and the parents to this day, when you talk to them about it, they get really teary-eyed because it's kind of like, okay, we know they have disabilities and this is all we're going to give them is a place in the basement where they can kind of be farther out of reach. Well, so when I got there and they kind of realized I was going to be a force to reckon with, I guess, we talked about it. And there is one room in the building that is nearest the handicapped accessible bathrooms, nearest the ramps, nearest handicap parking. We actually had to fight for the room and talk to a lot of classes and move them, do a lot of finagling to make that work. But we got it to work. And once we got that classroom, we couldn't believe how fast people stop by and look in the rooms and look in the window, look in the doors of the window, the windows of the doors, and look in all the windows outside to see what we're doing in there and to see what the kids are doing and what the adults are doing. And still to this day, every once in a while we have some problems, but with people saying they'd like the room back. But that was one obstacle we had to overcome. The other obstacle is it's probably the smallest population in our church, and people wonder why we need the most room or the most assets. Meaning sometimes you need to spend a little bit of money because kids with special needs need special things. Mm-hmm. And so I've had to kind of explain that these are things that we need to have to help these kids be successful and sometimes to learn about Jesus. If we want them to learn about Jesus, they need to be successful in our building. So we have worked on that to make it an environment, a sensory room environment. And we also have worked to make it a place where our volunteers feel like they can be successful with our kids. So that's one way to look at it as well. Mm-hmm. The other thing is I've spent a good amount of time talking to our pastoral staff and some of the managers of our church too, to try to make them not necessarily just change their perspective on things, because not everybody truly, everybody, God gives us in different ways. So they maybe have a heart for something totally different than those with special needs. But I needed them to kind of come alongside me and find that love for it. So it took me a little bit of time to maybe transfer that love a little bit. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know what you mean. Like get their heart open to it and see the need and respond. Yep.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering kind of two things. And so one's kind of specific, one's more general. And the general thing is just wondering, what are some more examples of things that you see commonly show up in churches where it's like, yep, we probably need to change that or tweak this or implement that, if you're going to serve special needs families. Because again, I think that'd be helpful to people listening. But then the other thing too, and this is a specific question, I know one of the big questions you have to answer, not that you have to answer, but a lot of churches wrestle with is, are we going to serve special needs families well and it's going to be totally inclusion based? Or are we going to have a separate room like you're talking about and use that in a certain way? Some churches can't do both, right? It just depends on their context and their facility and all that. So I'd love your thought on that. And then anything else really that you think of that's like, yeah, you know what, this comes up a lot. Churches should probably think about how they do this, or you know what I mean, in terms of the practical part of serving special needs families better.
Right. So the practical part of it is this. So we do have a room at Sensory that serves our population that cannot be included. And then we also have an inclusion program. So we have buddies for all of our kids. And then our buddies do go out and meet our kids that our parents either prefer to be out in full inclusion or that we know should be in full inclusion. And we provide those buddies. So we have both at our church. And when I go into churches, I talk about that with both, on both ends, that if you have kids who need to be out, put them out and put put a buddy out there just as a support, a safety net, just in case, and those buddies can be a 13-year-old kid, that loves Jesus and is ready to be right there and that is really responsible, which we do that. And it's amazing how much that can work and how they just become such good friends. Some of the most common things that I see, really common is this, that oftentimes, at all the different levels, this is what I see in the early childhood area. So, is behaviors. So when kids are little and when they are first either being diagnosed or not yet being diagnosed, number one, you have parents who are very, very, what's a good word for it? Maybe touchy and very, that's probably not the right word. I'm trying to think of a better word.
Sure.
Sensitive, because they're looking to see maybe what's going on with their child and they haven't been diagnosed yet, or they've just been diagnosed. And we have to be very sensitive to how those parents are taking in anything that we're saying. So when they come to church, and we so want those families to know that, this isn't a mistake. God created this child the way that he or she is, and we're going to love this child. So they know that their child bites, hits, kicks. And so when they come back from church, and that's all we report to them, that's hard to hear. So in our church, we always, like when in our special needs program or with our buddies, we always try to just say, okay, today he did a really good job, or she did a really great job during this. And then we let the parents ask, okay, well, did they have any behaviors? We don't tell them the behaviors because they already know that there were behaviors. So that's one way the church can approach that. And one way that's something that's really common. When it gets to elementary school, that's another part of it. We do the same thing with elementary. And then middle school and high school, what I have found is this, that oftentimes that's when they really stand out because they don't fit in anymore. Especially if they have autism, they really become more of they just kind of stand out as an oddball. Or if they have Down syndrome, or if they have something else, they're behind their peers by years. And instead of their peers coming to them and just including them, or sometimes they over-include them and treat them like children. They sometimes leave them out, or they over-include them. So it needs to be a good balance. And the way that can be a good balance is that one of the leaders or a buddy demonstrates that and makes it available, that this is how we treat them. They're just like you guys. They just need a little bit of support. And that needs to be really accessible for these kids. And oftentimes that's not really done well. And that can be a real mistake, because then that can be mistaken for, we need to treat so-and-so like he's a baby because he acts like that sometimes, when that's not good. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts come to mind?
I'm trying to think. One thing that I think that is really, really good is that you have to remember it's not just a child, that you have these two people, or one, just depending on the family connection that comes with this child. And one thing I have really learned through this ministry with special needs is that it comes as a whole, the parent and the child. And oftentimes you can love that child and the child is fine, but the parent is who is hurting the most. And you can sometimes spend more time loving on that parent than you do the actual child. Mm-hmm. And so if there's anything that you can do that would teach you more about how to connect with parents with special needs, or of a child with special needs, or read about what you can do to help them, or how you could just pour into them or love on them, or just give them a break when you can, or just pray for them. Even those extra things that you can do, all of that counts, because they truly are an undervalued, resourced group. And that's why we chose to do the respite, because it's just something that these parents so desperately need. And I try to remind people that, when you have children who don't have disabilities, you have an end date. They grow up and they leave the house and they go. But like, we have a family in our program that has 3 children with autism, and there is no end date. They will all be at home unless they go to a group home. They will all be at home forever. And I think when those parents think about that, that's an overwhelming thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, which we are constantly trying to just build into those parents and love on them. And, so your ministry isn't just to the person with special needs. It's all encompassing. And that's how we, made our church ministry is based on that too. It's not just to the child, it's to the whole family.
So with the organization and helping churches now, for a number of years, I'm just kind of wondering how many churches have been part of it, not necessarily just the number, but like, have you been able to help a number of churches in that area? So that way, as people want to get connected to a church, you might have a relationship with a church that's close to them. Because you know what I mean? Because I imagine the reach is kind of broad.
Yeah.
Some churches said no, they didn't want to be part of it, but some of them said yes. So what does that look like?
Sure. Yeah, they did. And so people will call and they'll say, this is what we're looking for. And a lot of people have come to our church specifically because we started a program called Pure Joy. And that is, and they know that we have it up and running and it's strong and they know that they can come. But then we also have a program at Trinity Lutheran here in town. So our church is Ashland Grace Brethren, and then we have Trinity Lutheran, which is two totally different denominations. So that allows for different things. And then we have other churches that already had programs started that were similar, very small, but they could support, a family that could show up on a Sunday morning just out of the blue. And so, I have that list. And when people call, I will say, look, this is the list that we have. And if this does not fit you, then we will meet you wherever you go. Just let me know where you want to go if the need is that severe. If not, then we call the church ahead of time and say, look, this family's coming with special needs, or they can call. And I always recommend that too, to a family, that if they would call the church ahead of time, that just gives the church at least a chance to know that they're coming and to be aware. So we work on that, and the church, the reach has gone pretty far. In fact, churches contact me about every week and say, could you tell us what to do with this? Or how can we handle that? Or, would you want to come and meet this family and tell us what to do with it and how to best handle this? And so it's really, they're catching on, which is what we were hoping for.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. So how can people connect with you if they have any questions about, how you've made this work or what it looks like at your church, or how you can maybe help them as they want to serve special needs families more?
Sure. So we have a website, and the website is www.ashlandspecialneedsministry.org. And on there are many pages you can look at, and it gives you all the information about what we do, who I am, our ministry, how we run everything. And then there's also resources that I've included, and different things. You can look at that. We have a Facebook page, which is Ashland Special Needs Ministry. You can email me at ASNMTEEVAN@gmail.com. And, other than that, pretty much once you do those things, you can get in contact with me on our, my goodness, sometimes your brain just doesn't work, on our,
Your
website. So sorry. Okay. Yes. Did you like that? I couldn't get the word. On our website, on every single page, there's a way on the right-hand side that says how to contact me. And you can click on that and it'll automatically email me. And you can fill in a message there. And lots of people email me from there and say, hey, would you be willing to come and do a training at our church? Or would you be willing to email me anything? Or would you be willing to answer questions? And I'm more than willing to do any of those things. That's a part of my job. And so, or if you're attending Orange this next year, I'll be back there speaking, and you can look me up there and we can talk. I'd be happy to meet with people. We've done that. And we do lots of fun things. So I'd love to help anybody.
That's great. That's awesome. Well, thank you for the work that you're doing there and helping other churches. That's tremendous. I know churches need a lot of help with that, I think. And so that's great. And thanks for taking the time to come on the podcast today to talk about it.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I don't know about you, but I think that's a pretty cool organization that Christina has helped start there, and a great idea. I think every community could probably use that. I mean, my sense in our community here is similar. There's a few churches that serve special needs families well. In many cases, they're large enough. They have dedicated part-time staff or full-time staff towards that. But of course, that's not what's necessary, right, to do this. And so I love that they're helping families in their community, but also connecting it to church. I just obviously think that's so important to connect it back to churches and getting churches to work together, which is just great. A few action items I think of coming out of there is, one, what would it look like to connect with some community organizations that do help families with special needs? Because what could you learn? How could they maybe help you? How could you help them? I think that would be a great thing. Two, what would it look like to maybe partner with some other churches? That maybe you're going to work together to provide a respite night for families or something like that. Because again, this is the kind of thing that churches could easily work together on, despite how you might disagree about theology or methods, or maybe your churches are kind of far apart. None of that would really matter if you could come together around something like this. And third, hopefully you listened as she talked about, what are some of the things that come up when she helps churches, and you can act on anything in your church that's maybe a barrier to reaching families with special needs or disabilities, and you can work to remove that barrier and make that something that is a good experience for them. And so I don't know what that specifically might be for you and for your church, but if you're like me, you were listening thinking, okay, what's going to apply here? How well do we do in that area with that thing that she's talking about? So those are a few action items I think of coming out of there. Like I said in the beginning, we're not going to have podcast episodes the next couple of weeks on Christmas and New Year's Day. And hope you have a great Christmas. Hope you have a happy New Year. Hope your church celebrates Christmas in a big way, is able to reach people maybe who are not a part of any church. In our area, Christmas is a great time for that. People just seem to be more open to attending church than they are any other time of year. So I pray that is true for your church this Christmas, but I also hope and pray it's a great time for you personally, for your family to rest and relax and get away and kind of refuel. I think sometimes that's needed at the end of the year before starting another great new year. So I'm excited about the new year and what's to come. Don't forget to register for that volunteer training webinar. You can do that at ministryboost.org/webinars. And I'll catch you in the new year on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.